I just realized that I wore the same shirt 2 weeks in a row. I'm going to have to set up a wardrobe to figure this out. Episode 10 of Still the No Name Podcast. So my plea to anybody that is watching this, please get into the comments and give us a suggestion for the name. Obviously, my vision behind this is kind of manifesting itself as we go, but I've had so many blessings in my life, and it's usually around the people that have come into my world that I want to share as much as possible with as many people as possible, and this is a great venue for that. And without further ado, someone that has come into my world because of where I am and what I do is retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Shawn Dawley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Welcome, sir.
Glad to be here. And so that reveals some of the mystery when you asked me to come on what was called the No Name Podcast. I assume it's because you knew that I was a no-name public speaker, and that was maybe the draw. So now I have a little more background on what
maybe
this
that's
is all about.
Maybe a bunch of people that really are doing great things but aren't on billboards yet. What attracted to me, actually, your daughter introduced, I think, or we just happened to be at the same networking event. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I'm a big, I think the word's proponent of the military, and knowing that you had a military background. My father's a Marine. My uncles were all in the Army. So I have an affinity for military. But you also came introduced as a executive leadership coach, which also sparked my interest. So tell me a little bit about who you are, how you got here, and what do you do on a day-to-day basis. Although I am going to say this, actually I want you to say it. You said something off camera right before we get started. You wake up every day
unemployed.
Unemployed. I think that was
when you were no longer cashing
salesperson.
Yeah. If you were no longer punching that clock on a W-2 arrangement every day, you got to go out there and grind away and do business development. Because as a no name, my name is not Oprah or Tim Tebow. Just because I say I'm a public speaker and leadership development coach doesn't mean that they flock to me. I've got to still push and push and push. And so
you got the sales component. All right. So who are you? How'd you get here?
So you talked about me being a retired Air Force officer. Keyword there is retired. I spent 25 years in the Air Force, enlisted right out of high school at 17, was an aircraft mechanic, not very good at it. Do not have a strong mechanical aptitude, but
hopefully you didn't learn from experience that you weren't good at it.
So people might sometimes ask, well, how can that be? Like you were a pilot, like for 20 of those 25 years, you flew airplanes. And what I would say is it's one thing to fly them, it's another thing to fix them. My job was to break the plane. The smart guys were the ones who actually fixed it. And so, though I was a subpar mechanic, I took advantage of the Air Force's educational opportunities, got a degree in aeronautics, went to pilot training, and that's where I spent the preponderance of my career.
Did you always want to be a pilot?
No, not really. So I would say for our purposes here, my childhood was probably less than Norman Rockwell. Okay. I'll spare you all the details, but for any number of reasons, I had got it into my 17-year-old head that if not an official caste system, as in some countries, that there were people over there and people over here, and that never the two shall meet. And so I guess I didn't really grow up in an environment exposed to people engaged in careers. Most of what I heard around me from the adults were talking about jobs they despised. Let's get to Friday so we can, have fun on the weekend and then drag ourselves back on Monday. So I always had a roof over my head. When I say things like that, my well-being was provided for.
Right.
But I did not know that just anybody could actually pursue something with which they had passion. And so when I got into the Air Force as a mechanic and began to associate not with but around pilots, my perception of them changed. I had this sort of like Top Gun perception of pilots, that they were all valedictorians, class presidents, captain of the football team, 4.0.
Val Kilmer and Tom Cruise.
Oh, man, it's so untrue. I thought, man, these guys were as dumb as I am. If they can do this, I can do this, right?
Right.
But when I got to pilot training, day one, they went around the room of 30 of us who started, and like, okay, what is your name? Where are you from? And why do you want to be a pilot? Out of those 30 some odd dudes, the overwhelming majority had a story along the lines of, my mom took me to an air show when I was 7 years old, and I knew from that point forward I wanted to be a pilot. Well, when they got to me, I was dumb enough to just give them an honest answer. And I said, well, I was around some pilots as a mechanic, and I realized that there's really nothing special about them, and I can probably do that too. So maybe not. I needed to work on my social presentation.
Yeah, you were a community favorite at that moment.
Well, and I'm saying that to an Air Force pilot,
right.
My flight commander, right? So did that for 25 years, and by trade, pilot, but had some opportunities to do some career broadening, professional development things outside of that. Got into leadership through hook or crook, kind of stumbled my way up the ranks.
Forward.
And then left there, went into the corporate world. Once again, kind of went right into leadership roles. And so a couple of years back, I thought, I've learned to hold an audience's attention. I'm still a work in progress when it comes to the craft of public speaking, but I think I do okay. And other people who I respect kept promoting me into higher and more elevated positions of leadership, not just the military, but in the corporate world. And I thought, well, maybe I can put those two things together and become a leadership speaker. And so a couple of years ago, I finally just ripped the Band-Aid off what had been an idea bouncing around for 5, 6, 7 years, and started my own company where I do keynote speeches to big crowds, leadership and team development workshops for 10 to 100, and then one-on-one executive coaching where we're doing a deeper dive. And that client is usually a senior executive, C-suite, business owner. Because of the price point, that one-on-one coaching is probably not going to be something I would do for frontline first-time leaders. They're going to be in the workshops.
Right. So let's. I don't know why I feel like compelled to say a shameless plug, because it's not a shameless plug. What is the name of your business? Let's get that out there.
So the LLC is OT2 Consulting. But if you just want to find me on the web, on the interweb, it's www.ShawnDawley.com.
OT2. Is there a significance there?
There is. And again, this is the LLC. This is my EIN for tax filing purposes. Everything that we ever did as pilots and aviators was defined off of two metrics: on time, on target.
Okay.
So if we had to put a payload onto an objective area, it wasn't good enough to get it close. And if it needed to be there at 03:35, don't get it there at 3, don't get it there at 4. Because that SEAL team, that Army infantry unit, that Delta operation, they have to expose themselves at that objective area to get whatever payload we're putting down on the ground. And if you say, well, we were only 5 minutes late, well, you stand out in the middle of an open battlefield for 5 minutes and tell me how you feel about 5 minutes late. So everything that we did was always reverse engineered from there. Will we get to that magical point in space precisely, and will we get there exactly when we're supposed to be? And then you work backwards from that. So
it's actually OT squared. On time, on target.
Yeah, unfortunately, the superscript square is kind of hard to knock out on a tax form. So
I love that. So you say that, and I have this mantra in my brain, and I share it with people sometimes: be at the right place at the right time all the time. So it's kind of, similar.
Well, so when I am asked to speak on a particular topic, like, hey, can you talk to us about change or perseverance or influence, whatever it may be, rather than writing out my introduction and trying to cobble together a bunch of vignettes or jokes or slogans, I always start with the end in mind. When I am done, what do I want people to think? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? And that then becomes the North Star for everything else. Because all too often, we get so busy that we just start marching forward. And if we're not crystal clear on that destination, we can end up taking some unnecessary steps or perhaps even going in the wrong direction. And so I don't think it's a bit of a stretch that it might sound apples and oranges, but I approach developing a keynote speech or a workshop the way I approach a combat sortie. On time, on target, what is the objective? And then work backwards from that end point.
That's teaching 101. You should have been an educator.
There's a lot of things my teachers would have said I should have done, that ain't one of them. So let's say that 50-year-old Shawn is a much different version than 15-year-old Shawn.
So I've had multiple careers, educator, college baseball coach, now in business. And now I'm hearing you say it in military is you got to start with what you want the outcome to be. Like here's what I want to accomplish. So we talk about reverse engineering. What mindset do you have to have, and what activities do you have to do so that you can hit that target? It's amazing how simple things can be if you really spend the time. And simplicity is genius, right?
Well, yeah. And so whether it was developing a large, theater level campaign plan, or it was just a one-off tactical sortie, if you know your objective, once you put that plan in motion and the contingencies and crises begin to mount, it makes your decision-making process a lot easier. Because if you know what your values are and you know what your ultimate end game is, when pop-up situations present themselves, making a decision in that moment is easier because you can baseline it against where you're trying to get to. I just went on a big family vacation, multi-generations a couple of weeks ago. At 50, I know that the purpose of that vacation is to strengthen family bonds and to create a beautiful, memorable event. 20 years ago, the objective was we will get to Disney World. We will get the fast pass. And so then you think about, okay, in the context of those two different mindsets, when something pops up, if I know that my ultimate objective is to create, a positive, lasting family memory, the decision I make in that moment will probably be different than, no, come heck or high water, we will get to the theme park no later than 800 hours, right?
Yeah, whether you're kicking and screaming or having a good time, we're getting there.
That's right. Hey, I don't care that you kids are having fun splashing around in the pool, laughing and playing. Get out. We have to go make this event that we have tickets for at 35 minutes from now. So.
Yeah, well, I think that speaks to your why. Like your why changes over time. So we've heard, I think common culture says, you gotta know what your why is before you can start. Simon Sinek probably made it the most famous. But your why at 20, being a 20-year-old parent, is a lot different than a 50-year-old possibly grandparent.
Oh yeah, so. Absolutely.
All right. You talked about the end in mind. So this came, and I don't remember where I got this from. So this is not original to me, but I've really started thinking about purpose, peace, and profit. So when you're dealing with situations, when you're scripting your day, when you're trying to figure out your outcomes, is that activity, is that energy output getting you closer to peace? Is it getting you closer to your purpose, or is it getting you closer to your profit? So let's hit those three things with you.
Sure.
You can pick which one you want to start with.
We can talk about, let's say, you said peace, purpose, profit?
Yep.
Peace. Let's go with peace.
All right. So most stressful situation in the world, you want to just unplug and you just want to bring center, like just total calm to your life. What are you going to do?
Oh, how will I arrive at peace?
Yeah.
Oh,
no, like today was the most stressful day in the world, and somebody said, "Hey, do whatever you need to do, unplug, get recentered, and come back ready." So, what activity, what things do you do to bring peace to your world?
I would say that metaphorically, unplug for me is to literally unplug. I am a lone voice in the wilderness. I know that the train has left the station, but the constant bombardment via social media and anything that has a screen attached to it has a way of stealing our ability to be present in the moment and to be just intrinsically satisfied with what we have, because that screen, whether it's a television, laptop, iPad, your phone, is usually showing who has more, who has it better, et cetera. And I don't want to get on a soapbox and preach about that. But first and foremost, that's got to go for me. And then what is something...
All screens, all electronics, all screens. Just
Yeah. Because, the nature of the person on the other side of that screen is such that they wake up and spend all hours figuring out how to tweak the algorithms to create an addictive characteristic about whatever it is you're viewing to hook you, to keep you. There are small armies of behavioral neuroscientists that are working in the entertainment industry, at the social media platforms, whose goal is to trigger the dopaminergic pathways of your neuroanatomy to trigger within you addictive, types of characteristics. And so if we think that we can play around with that, then it's not going to have a corrosive effect on our psyche. We're kidding ourselves. So I know enough to know to, like, not just metaphorically, but literally unplug from that crap.
As we're recording a short podcast for social media.
Yeah.
Our goal, if you got to create attention, and my friend Michael talks about purpose, like what is or intent, like what is the intent of the attention, like are you trying to do good? So
sure.
Right, so unplug, number one,
and then but something like more positive that I would undertake. Any commune with nature is beneficial to the mind, body, and soul. There is something just innately accommodating about finding yourself in nature. It's hard to be stressed out in the forest next to a babbling brook, right?
Yeah.
There's just something that feels familiar about that because of how we are, physiologically wired. So whether it's going on a hike an hour away or just walking around your neighborhood and, seeing the grass and seeing the trees, like that has a tremendously therapeutic effect. I like to read. I find that reading something printed on paper is preferable.
Yeah, I can't get into tablets and pads and all that stuff.
So my problem is a lack of discipline. So if I am engaged and I'm 2/3 of the way into a paragraph and there's a hyperlink on a word, I am inclined to what is it going to say?
Yeah.
Whereas if I pick up a newspaper, so I'm old school, Wall Street Journal, delivered to the house, or a book, it captures me in that moment. It disallows for me to tap my way out of the moment.
Right.
And I think that the nature of how we've organized our society nowadays is that we tend to kind of swim in the shallows because we say we multitask, we really are just distracted from thing to thing to thing to thing. There's something about old school reading print on paper that has a way of, I think, capturing your intellect and causing you to probably take a deeper dive than you might if you're just scrolling.
Yep.
And again, just staying at the superficial level.
Interesting. We have a lot of like-minded. You applied a lot more technical terms. What was that? I call it dopamine addiction.
Okay, well, so dopamine is one of 100 neurotransmitters or chemical compounds that our brain produces, and dopaminergic is one of the pathways.
Yep.
There's 86 billion neurons in our brain, and they are a series of networked, interstate highways. And when we engage in behaviors that can be addictive, it has a way of rewiring our neuroanatomy such that when you remove that stimulus, we begin to yearn for it, to want it. And we have a hard time focusing if we're not satiating, that desire. And so when they've put people on EEGs or functional MRIs, like there's some amazing parallels between the effects of social media / smartphones and chemical
imbalance,
addictive attributes. All right, because you take a person who lives on their phone and you put their phone face down and you turn off the notifications. That person is going to be wondering, what am I missing? Was there an alert? Was there a buzz? Was there a beep? Was there an update? Was there a breaking news? And it has a way of just distracting us from being fully present.
And there's a study. Again, I'm going to generally hit it, but like when your phone rings or buzzes, the chemical change in your body is identical to the same chemical change when you take a first drink of alcohol. So like when you do that, these neural pathways fire and chemicals and all this stuff that you probably understand more, but it's the same, like your body's reacting the same way to a vibration in your phone as it is to that first drink of alcohol. And we're giving that to 12-year-olds.
And that's not, that's not by accident. And so again, I don't know that most of us recognize that we are the variable guinea pig in a social experiment involving 6 out of the 8 billion people on the planet with no known outcome. Now, neither you nor I are digital natives. Like, we grew up before this was commonplace. I mean, the iPhone's only been around since what, like 2007, 2008.
Yeah. I mean, I remember a world where the remote control was hardwired to the back of the TV.
Yeah, right. So for us to adopt it later in life is one thing, but the prefrontal cortex does not finish developing till about age 25. And I have serious reservations about the development of the brain inside of young people who are growing up with a smartphone in their pocket. And people will say, well, but what if there's an emergency and they got to get a hold of their mom and dad? And well, I get all that, but since Adam and Eve up until 2007, people didn't have smartphones, and somehow the world kept spinning.
Kept going, yeah.
Right. And the last thing, I guess I'm kind of coming off like a cantankerous old man. Get off my lawn, back in my day.
Right.
But when you show me year after year, more Americans and Western Europeans and first world country people in general, every year, feel more isolated, feel more socially disconnected, are taking in greater quantities psychotropic medications for anxiety, depression, attention deficit disorder. You've never had higher numbers of kids reporting self-loathing or low self-esteem. Well, I look at the landscape of our society and think, well, what is quantitatively and qualitatively different now than 20 years ago? And it always kind of comes back to a couple of very specific things. Mm-hmm. The phones in our pockets,
right,
and access to social media. So smarter people than me will probably continue to take a look at this, but there's so much money involved in this that the powers to be are going to be, I mean, this genie's not getting put back in the bottle.
Well, and like you said, tobacco industry knew it. Alcohol industry knew it. The fast food industry knows it. Mm-hmm. Frito-Lay knows it. Like, you talk about the amount of science. Anyways, we're in a rabbit hole, and that could be a whole nother 30-minute conversation. All right, so peace is unplug and get to nature. I love waking up in the morning and taking my shoes off and just standing in the grass for 5 minutes. I do that every morning.
Do you really?
I try to.
Oh, good for you, man. That's awesome.
I don't know. Grounding, I kind of got in this little rabbit hole about, reconnecting yourself to the earth. And, we walk around on concrete and LVP and tennis shoes and all this stuff. So, all right. So purpose or profit? Where do you want to go next?
Let's go with purpose.
Why are you on this world? Why are you on this world? Why are you in this world, on this earth?
Yeah.
Today, if you're on time and on target, what are you accomplishing in this world?
So I think that I have found purpose whenever I have been involved in something that was, for one, bigger than me, and secondly, that in my heart I believed served a noble intent. So there might be, let's say, a young woman that might not pick a fight with that big burly biker that cut in front of her at the grocery store checkout line. But if he tried to get into her car and drive off with her toddler in the back seat, she finds another gear, because suddenly it's not about her; it's about something bigger than her. It's about
her child,
protecting her child. And I have found that in general, most of us can typically power through our own ambition when it's all about us, but it's hard, I think, to sustain that. However, if we feel like we are engaged in something that has value beyond our own well-being, I think it has a way of just kind of like providing us like this almost limitless reservoir of energy and effort. So for me, purpose is not going to be defined by material things. I can't say that wasn't always the case, and I've cashed every check I've ever been sent. Okay, but with whatever meager talent God has blessed me with, and with whatever time He allows me to spend it, I feel most content when I am engaged in something that serves a higher calling.
Well, and so this is again, not to minimize it, but if you go back to being a leadership coach or a leadership, that's effectively, in some degree, what you're doing. You're for that executive creating this situation where they have to be part of something bigger than themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you leave them alone, they're going to keep doing whatever they need to do. But if you bring in an accountability partner, which you do as a coach, that now that they're responsible for something bigger than themselves, it's the relationship between you and them.
Yeah.
And again, that's a micro level of what you do. But you hit it on the head. If you show up every day for somebody else, you're going to show up more intensely, more consistently, more often than if you're showing up for yourself. Because humans are terrible. Like we will let ourselves down all the time, but we won't let somebody else down.
That's right. And I think there's something noble maybe about that. Some people may erroneously think that your profession only has purpose if it fits into some narrowly defined categories. Teachers have purpose, nurses have purpose, firefighters have purpose. Well, I would tell you that just about any profession absolutely can have purpose beyond the roof it puts over your head, depending on how you approach it. I mean, take real estate, for example. That commission check is great, when it clears. And a laborer is worthy of his wages. But if what also motivates you to do what you do is to help navigate somebody through one of the most stressful and emotionally charged episodes of their life, to be an objective sounding board to help them think through the pros and cons, to walk them through the process, and then hand them the keys and they walk into that house and you feel like, you know what? Yes, I will cash the commission check, but I have done something that has benefited this person, these people, beyond the monetary transaction. There's purpose in that. If you're serving coffee and you're making, an hourly wage, but your purpose within that every day is to find that one person standing in line who seems a little down, and somehow, some way, you put a pep back in their step. There's purpose in that.
Yep.
And so I would ask people, if you wonder, gosh, do I have purpose? If you hit the $1 billion Powerball, and you would keep doing your job or some aspects of it for free, then you find intrinsic purpose in that role. I have had jobs I only did for the money.
Yep.
I didn't work at McDonald's in high school outside of track and basketball for some noble calling. It was for the $3.35 an hour I got.
Yeah.
I didn't bale hay or deliver newspapers, for anything other than the money. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, I believe, and I have seen it around the world. It is the best system to allow independent adults exercise free agency. I don't want any other way. But if we only have, let's say, 75 years on life, if that's it, that's the actuarial standard. Well, by that definition, my life is 2/3 of the way over. I've got 2 yesterdays for every tomorrow. Do I want to spend it in pursuit of money that I can convert into material, objects, or would I be better served personally to pursue something that I think has value beyond, beyond me? So.
Yeah. Well, and so you put me in a rabbit hole, but I would venture to bet when you were working at McDonald's, even though there's not some noble purpose, you probably showed up to be the best version of yourself in that situation. Guessing.
Probably not. And let me also quickly, quantify something. 16-year-old Shawn went to McDonald's without purpose. I'm not saying that the, division vice president over the entire, so I'm not saying that. I'm saying for me, my goal each and every shift was to do just enough not to get fired. That was it, right? I wasn't looking to be employee of the month. I wasn't, angling for a scholarship to Hamburger University. I was just trying to make a little change. Thing. It is.
Yep.
So, I would challenge people that if that is your approach, if you are dragging yourself into some place and your threshold is, let me get over that bar that doesn't allow them to fire me, that's probably not sustainable.
Right.
even if you made $1 million a year.
Yep.
You do that for 40 years, you'll be miserable.
No, I totally agree. And I guess my point was when you get in that situation, if you can't find true purpose and you're not being led or motivated by the people around you, you're in the wrong situation. The sooner that you can understand that, even if it was 16-year-old Shawn or 25-year-old Shawn, when you start to understand that, I think that's when things really start to change in the world around you.
I agree with that.
You start making the world bigger than you ever thought it could be, and you start exposing yourself to more things. All right, last one, profit. And I say profit, as a business owner, we look at profit because, and again, this whole money conversation, I do it for money because money is the tool that allows me to do the things that I want to do in my life. But ultimately, I'm doing it for my why, not for the money. But the money just helps me get there. So what, in terms of profit, whether it's true profit, like what do you do to make money, or how do you judge success and on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Well, I love the way you talk about money as a tool, because one thing I know to be true is that a tool, any tool, can only assume the character of the person wielding it.
Okay.
You put any tool into the hands of two different people, hero and villain, and that tool will be exercised in two vastly different ways. The tool is agnostic.
Okay.
So money in the hands of somebody with their head on straight can be a force for good. You put it in the hands of somebody who's a self-absorbed egomaniac, and it's going to be conspicuous consumption. Look how expensive my car is. Look how big my house is. Look at this $4,500 Coach purse I've got. And again, to each his, if that floats your boat. But money, I love that definition of money as a tool. So for me, if you are able-bodied, of sound mind, and an adult in America, you have an obligation to provide for yourself. There is no reason that an able-bodied person of sound mind in this country should be supported by other adults. And so first and foremost, if whatever you are pursuing does not put food on your table and a roof over your head, you need to either work harder or find something else to do. So I do believe absolutely that we need to acquire money as a tool to provide for ourselves. Beyond that, what determines my success, again, as the guy that cashes every check that a corporation sends me, I will tell you that occasionally when I'm done giving a keynote, I might get a standing ovation. And I appreciate that because when I show up, I feel like I'm about to spend these people's time. And prince or pauper, once I spend their time, they will not get it back.
Right.
So they deserve whatever my best is, they deserve that.
Right.
And when I get done, if I have showed up prepared and done my job to the best of my ability, I might get that standing ovation. And I do appreciate that. But what keeps me going is the next day when I get a text that's about 6 inches long, that, hey, sorry to bother you. I found your number online. Hope this is okay. And somebody goes on to say something very heartfelt about how, I almost didn't come and then I couldn't find a spot and I almost left the parking lot, but I felt like you were talking to me. I felt like you wrote that speech for me. I felt like I needed that more than I even recognized. That, because I know how small I am. I know how unimportant I am. A room of 1,000 people standing and clapping, I appreciate it. One person telling me that somehow, some way, in some small measure, I touched their life and left them feeling more optimistic to the end of time is enough to keep me going.
Yeah. You remind me of a story that I tell our team all the time. You just and we talk about business having conversations, right? If you have a conversation with someone, you can possibly eventually get in relationships so they could be a lifelong client. You just never know what you say and what impact it's going to have on people around you. And I think about a story that I heard a long time ago. Two people go to church service, sitting in the same pew next to each other, hear the sermon, spend an hour at church, walk out, and one of them go shaking his head. And he's like, that was the worst service I've ever been to. I don't even know what he was talking about. There was nothing of value. Maybe we should get a new preacher. And he looks over to kind of get that affirmation
Right,
from his
right,
friend
right.
that he was sitting with, and his friend's bawling. And he's like, how can you say that? That I needed to hear that. That was the
Yeah.
most powerful thing I've heard in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Like, you never know when or if somebody needs to hear a certain thing. So
Yeah.
like you said, you and kind of goes back to my teacher DNA. You show up every day and you be the best version of a teacher you can
That's
be.
right, yeah.
You don't know how they're going to receive what you give them that day.
That's right. Yeah.
And one day you might deliver
Yeah.
the best speech ever, the best content, and nobody picked up on it because
Yeah.
they weren't ready to receive it,
Yeah.
right? But you hit that one person when they're ready to receive what you're trying to give to them, and it changes everything.
Yeah, bingo. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Speaking of that, so Pat, any great stories from past, either your leadership in the military or executive coaching, where someone's come back to you and said, "Hey, man, I needed that." Like, what was your biggest highlight from what you've done?
So I've been blessed that has happened on more than a few occasions, and again, or maybe I should not say again. Shawn Dawley has not invented a single leadership principle. I'm a pretty big nerd when it comes to history, and so whether it is from like Greek, Roman, Chinese, philosophy from antiquity, or the Old or New Testament, give me the flavor of the month, the leadership guru of the moment, and what he or she is saying, and then give me 2 minutes with a 2,500, 2,000-year-old book, and I will prove that this is not new.
Yeah,
because
I'll agree.
if it's technological, yeah, there's cutting edge literature. But if it has to do with the basic dynamic of interpersonal relations, there has not been a new idea in 2,000 years. And so whenever somebody is kind enough to give me a compliment, I'm usually pretty quick to let them know I am only passing along what better people than me have poured into this center, right? Some people like to brand and trademark their ideas. I'm like, oh man, I get what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. I agreed with it the first time I read it in the works of Thucydides. It was written 500 years BC. So in that light, it's not false modesty. I do get those people that say, man, I made a career decision based off of the one interaction I had with you. That both humbles and haunts me because it lets you know, like, okay, I be careful,
Right.
Stay humble because you never know when somebody might really be listening to your point.
Yeah.
But I'm usually very quick to follow up that if there was something that you found wise in what I had to say, please know that I am not the source.
Yeah. That you're a conduit for, not everybody sits around and reads and has access to the experiences you had. So if you can distill them and then repurpose them and put them on a different platter for somebody that can receive it, I think it's very powerful. Two things before we finish up. One, what's your favorite historical quote as a studier?
Oh gosh, so I can keep you here for hours with those. But maybe within the interest of what we're talking about, I think maybe one that is apropos. And for a man that is so often quoted, I feel like one of the more powerful quotes that doesn't get as much play as it should is from Martin Luther King. And if people are paying attention at home and running this verbatim through the Google, I apologize if I don't get it exactly right. But he said, I think to the effect, if you are called to be a street sweeper, sweep those streets the way Michelangelo painted, the way Beethoven composed music, the way Shakespeare worked with prose. Sweep those streets so that all the hosts of heaven and earth will one day say, here once lived a great street sweeper. For many years, I was mistaken in that I will do my best when I get that position that merits my best. I will turn in a 100% effort when I finally get that job where it matters. I will be an A+ professional when I get that fancier title. And what I eventually found to be true is that if we are always growing where we are planted, the rest of it will take care of itself.
Yep.
And because we do live in a world where we are bombarded with everybody's success, everybody's AI-generated physique photos,
now they're
everybody's
getting crazy.
curated photos, right?
Yeah.
It could be easy to think that, well, I'm only just a fill in the blank. I'm just a receptionist. I'm just a custodian. I'm just a mechanic. I'm just a resident. I'm not even, the chief doctor. We can always only just ourselves into obscurity, but in reality, hearkening back to what we just talked about, you never know when you're going to be in a position to make a profound impact. And it might be well before you reach that title where you think it's going to matter.
I think of two quotes: dress for the job you want, and then from the military, you're always one bullet away. I mean, I got morbid with that, but you never know when that operates, so you've got to be prepared for it.
That's right. Steve Martin once said, what was key to your success? And again, I'll paraphrase. He said something to the effect of, just be so gosh darn good they can't ignore you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you feel like you are relegated within your organization to a role that is beneath you, you knock that out of the park, and eventually you'll force their hand.
Claire's sitting over there. I think I told her, I said, you want to make more money? Make it so painful that if you leave that I have to pay you more money. No, but I think all those things run true. So again, those things hold the test of time. I'm gonna give you my quote, because I just want to I don't know how many times Voltaire is quoted on social media, but I'm gonna quote him. I may not I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to your death the right to say it.
Yeah, right.
I think that to me right now is something that we need as a society need to. We don't have to agree,
sure,
but we have to agree that we both have the right to have our own opinions, and that we can live civilly through that. All right, last thing I want to lead you with. Sounds like leadership chased you around. You weren't necessarily looking for it, but every time you turned around, you're being tapped on the shoulder for some kind of leadership responsibility. I've felt that same way my entire life. Like, why do people keep calling me a leader? I don't know what I'm doing that makes me a leader. So I'm struggling with that. Not struggling with it, but I'm becoming more aware of it. Is that a similar thing for you, or did you know why you were tapped on the shoulder?
So early on, I did not, and I don't know that if it was maybe a lack of confidence or a lack of awareness, but the first handful of times that I was plucked out of the herd and then placed into leadership positions, essentially over what would have been peers, it wasn't crystal clear to me why that was. I think in retrospect, what I recognize now is that if you had to force me to pick one word that defines leadership, it is responsibility. And in an organization, we have people with formal titles, and we have people with informal ability and authority. And in large measure, you can divide most organizations into two major buckets. Those who view everything around them with a sense of responsibility, and those who take much more of like a laborer's mentality. Like, This is my lane, this is my job, I've done my task, I don't care about what is happening around me. And so I think that early on, the elders appointed over me perhaps detected that I took somewhat of like an owner's mentality of the small piece of real estate around me.
Right.
Instead of, well, it's 4:00, I'm going home. It's like, well, it's 4:00. There's some pretty important tasks that are not yet accomplished. Without being prodded on my own initiative, I will make sure this gets done. Most leaders that are effective tend to have that outlook. And so sometimes we identify the attributes in somebody. We have to, before we put them into those positions where those attributes really matter.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Well, our time's up. Anything you want to leave us with before we head out?
I appreciate the opportunity, brother.
Well,
Thank you.
There's never been a time that we haven't had a conversation that I've not been enlightened. So, as a 100% commissioned salesperson, I'm going to wake up tomorrow unemployed, and that is
leave the cave, kill something, drag it back.
Drag it back. So, all right, brother, I appreciate it, and we'll see y'all next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Well, cool, man.